Experts in the Wire is sponsored by BuzzSumo, a tool where you can find the key influencers to promote your content. Stay tuned to find out how you can get 30% off 3 months from BuzzSumo. Okay, let's get into today's show. This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 84. Simo Ahava.
Instead of saying, I don't know how to code, the way to fix it and the way to place you on a learning path is to just say that I don't know how to code yet. Almost all the meaningful metrics revolve around a session. I'm not sure that so many people actually know what a session is. The problem with bounce rate is that it goes against everything we do as analysts, which is segment and drill down. If there's a high bounce rate on the Contact Us page, I wouldn't be worried about that. The user found what they were looking for. They called you on their phone.
How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, and thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. A few weeks ago, I saw Rand Fishkin tweet an article of yours entitled The Myth of the Non-Technical Marketer. And I think I emailed you and I said that, I followed your blog and your work for some time. I've definitely seen you out there. But that article got me really excited to contact you and bring you onto the show. And honestly, sadly, in the world of SEO, digital marketing, I find myself not getting super excited about many blog posts and articles that I see nowadays. Maybe I'm just getting old and grumpy, but yours really, really struck a chord with me. So I'm really excited to talk about that. But first, let's chat a little bit about your background. So as I understand, you come from a technical background. Can you set that up a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's fairly accurate. I've been in web development since late 90s. And building websites ever since, dabbled with JavaScript back then already, but really got into web development in the last 3 or 4 years maybe. And now I consider myself, for the last couple of years, I consider myself a full-time developer actually. And then digital marketing has kind of come along. I've always been interested in the interface between, how apps and how websites are actually fitting into the market they're designed for, and how they are built to accommodate users' needs. So I'm very interested in the technical part of things, but I'm actually getting more and more excited about the application of this technical know-how more than the development work itself. So it's always been a hybrid for me. And then analytics has been just a natural. I think I ask so many questions all the time. I'm so curious about things that, the curious nature of analytics and what data tells us about things is just... It's as self-evident to me as breathing oxygen. It just comes naturally that people should be interested in numbers and analytics. So I think that's the kind of hybrid I am today.
And I noticed you went through a little phase, at least on your blog, in SEO. Can you describe how you got into SEO? And then what I'm really curious about is you made the shift sort of out of SEO and now into what you focus on now, tag management, data, analytics, etc. So how did you get into SEO? And then what caused you to make that shift away from it?
All right, how should I frame this? Because you have an audience of people in SEO, and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. Well, I got into SEO. It was pure happenstance. I've been fairly familiar with search engine and search engine marketing throughout my web development career. Obviously, because if I'm working for an organization and I want them to get more traffic, organic has always been a very, very influential source. But I was working as a product manager in a fairly typical IT company, and kind of was a bit tired of just juggling around Excel files and product management, project management stuff. And then a friend of mine who was working at a digital marketing agency called NetBooster contacted me and asked if I wanted to come aboard, or if I know somebody who might be interested in like web development and search engine optimization. I was looking at this bullet list that he wrote, and I just instantly saw that this is something that I want to do. So I just told him to stop looking around and just hire me. And as it happened, I got the job, and I started as technical SEO. I did a lot of technical SEO, which was comfortable to me. I enjoyed going through the kind of crawling patterns and identifying server-side stuff and figuring out what a good HTML template should look like, and all this, working with the Search Console or Webmaster Tools as it was back then. And so I really enjoyed it when I started off. Very soon I became completely tired with it. I got tired of maybe it's just in Finland, maybe it's elsewhere as well, but the reason I fell out of love with SEO was that regardless of the recommendations I might give, or regardless of what I say I feel is the right thing to do, there's always going to be 10 others going to say that they have a better idea, or that they know what's right. And there's no end to that debate because there's very little like factual evidence out there that what actually works.
Right.
There are of course we know from trends what is more likely to work than others. But the vagueness of the culture and the vagueness of the industry itself leads to a lot of this kind of snake oil stuff where competition is getting really aggressive in how they sell. And so, for example, if I told my client, I can do an audit for you for, let's say, 50,000 euros, the client calls me back the next day, hey, they contacted 3 others and they can all sell it for, 10,000 euros. And they said that these others give you the exact same stuff. And it's very difficult to operate in that kind of a market when all you have are results that are based on a certain amount of vagueness, and it's very easy to manipulate the customers and clients if you are very nefarious in what you do. So I think I just kind of gave up. Because I always had the out that I always could do software development and I always could do analytics, which is in a way a bit more resilient to this kind of bullshit marketing. So there was always that out, and I think maybe it's a lack of perseverance or something, but I just didn't feel like I want to go over that battle every single time I have a new client or a new project. Because I just got very tired of it. I'm very exhausted with the whole thing.
I think myself and all my listeners can relate to some of the things you just described. One thing that came to mind for me is I've been really pushing a client lately to just simply put categories in their blog and then link to them. And the battle to get that to happen is so difficult and definitely can get frustrating. So even that challenge of getting people to actually implement, beyond their opinions, just getting them to actually do what you want is a challenge in SEO as well. What is a Google developer expert? And I believe you're one of these. So what is that exactly?
It's a program by Google where they invite. It has an interview process, and it's actually pretty rigorous. But they invite certain individuals in different Google's products like Cloud and Android and Analytics to act as champions in the developer circles around the world. So they expect us to do a lot of support for them, a lot of evangelization, trying to increase the awareness of Google's platforms for developers around the world. So my role as a developer expert for Google Analytics, I think there's 5 of us now working with GA and GTM, is to talk to developers and try to get them to understand the benefits of how Google Analytics works, what it can do for developers, how GTM works, what it can do for developers. So there's no official affiliation with Google. There's no payroll or anything like that, and we are allowed to use other software as well, and we're allowed to be critical of Google. But Google kind of has recognized that we are very vocal and public members in the communities, and we enjoy talking about their software. So it's maybe also a bit of a reward for us for all the work we've done over the years, that they want to thank us and kind of give us this recognition. But it does involve this kind of evangelization part as well. So they do expect us to keep on spreading the word, which I'm more than happy to do. And
so we're going to chat about your article about the myth of the non-technical marketer in one moment. But first, tell me what, and if I pronounce this correctly, Reaktor.com?
Reaktor. It's just Reaktor. Yeah.
Okay. I butchered that. That's okay.
It's fine.
I got your last name though, right?
That was pretty good.
What is Reaktor? And I believe this is the company that you work with.
Yeah, I work for Reaktor. Reaktor is it's a Finnish technology house, or it's based in Finland, but we also have offices in New York, in Dubai, in Tokyo, in Amsterdam. We are I think we're calling ourselves a full service technical house or something like that. So we have designers, developers, analysts, marketers, and clients approach us with all sorts of problems in the digital industry, and we try to solve them. So we do a lot of websites and a lot of applications and stuff like that, but we also have some special projects like we've been working with HBO in the United States for a long time, helping them with their performance issues and front-end issues. We've been our software is running on the Finnair airline in-flight entertainment system. We've written that in JavaScript. We're shooting a satellite into space with some of our software on it. So a lot of different kind of multidisciplinary stuff, all done in an agile and kind of we try to transform organizations at the same time. I think that would be a very long elevator pitch about Reaktor. But
Sure.
it's a great, fantastic company. Lots of great developers bound.
Okay, so this is where, as an interviewer, I've learned to recognize that. As a listener, I would want to know a little bit more about that HBO thing, or maybe the satellite thing. So what exactly, just in like maybe a quick 30, 60 second, what types of things are you doing for HBO, or maybe what particular challenges or anything interesting there you could share would be really interesting?
Well, I think, not really sure how much I can share, but I think, HBO is a network that's always kind of, known for their quality content first and foremost. I mean, I'm a huge fan as well myself. But they've obviously, being such a really good quality content distributor, obviously a lot of people are very passionate about how they, about usability and the user experience of the HBO software and the website. And we've been helping HBO with those problems. So trying to turn their services make their services more usable and help them with their campaigns and all sorts of little stuff and some bigger stuff as well. Not really sure how much I can divulge apart from that, but we've had a good relationship with them.
And real quick on this shooting the satellite into space with the software on it, can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, so we're working with Finnish University of Technology, Aalto-yliopisto, which is the name of the university. I think we're working with SpaceX as well as the vehicle to shoot this stuff in. But we're working on nano satellites, which are like these very small cubes, and I think the sky is still open, like literally, to what you can do with that. Kind of an example is kind of building APIs in space. So we have satellites in space that you could potentially contact and have them do, work for you, have them do calculations, have them do measurements and report them back to Earth, instead of having to apply for really expensive licenses, waiting for these very narrow windows to open up when you can contact the satellite. So we're kind of, I think the plan is right now we're working on prototypes and piloting these endeavors, but at some point I think we're waiting for the moment when nano satellites are, filling the heavens, and you can just contact them, even with your own home computer, and have a satellite do some calculations in outer space for you. It's a lot of exciting stuff.
Yeah, I'm smiling over here because it really puts things into perspective. Because like as an SEO, I'm sitting here going like, can you connect my search console to like my Google Docs? And it's like, can we talk to the satellites in space? It really kind of like puts things in a very interesting perspective.
It can be overwhelming for a person in Reaktor as well, but at the same time, 99.9% of my daily work is around the typical stuff that you'd expect from a developer or a web analyst. It's not like I'm walking around Houston's command center and talking to astronauts or dressing up ready to step on a rocket. I'm just coding a website. But it's the thing about Reaktor is that. And many Finnish companies and many agile companies around the world is that it's not just about getting stuff done yourself, but it's also about pioneering some new technology so that others can do it more and more easily, such as what Elon Musk is doing. And I'm in no way comparing Reaktor to Tesla, but just the same idea that you need to just do something. It can be expensive and it can be ridiculous, but you have to do it so that others can then refine that process and make it easier and cheaper later on. But somebody has to be the first to do this stuff.
So let's chat about your myth of the non-technical marketer. I
Sure.
thought this was really interesting and relevant to my audience because most of us are doing SEO, and that's inherently what some might call a, quote, non-technical yet very technical field all mixed together. And so I thought this discussion was very fascinating. I'm wondering if you can kind of set up the article with maybe describing, was there something that triggered you or caused you to want to write this article? Was there something that kind of motivated you to get this out there?
Well, the motivation has been coming and going over the past 3 or 4 years. In the article, I actually quoted a little thread I wrote in Google Plus years ago, echoing the same sentiments. And I think for the past some years, because I've been so active in the online communities and in conferences, I've kind of I've been a bit amazed at there's been a lack of ambition from people, and I've always been a bit amazed at that, because people working in digital marketing, I don't think they understand the opportunities they have. They're working with the web browser, they're working with mobile devices, they're working with marketing, they're working with communications, with HR, with PR, with branding. They have all these different verticals at their reach, and yet at the same time, I think that they become very complacent, and they just want to do one thing well. And one of these things has been this technical component of their work, and I'm not really sure if this is just something that I've picked up over the years, but it feels like some people are almost wearing this non-technical thing as a badge of honor. You know, they're proud that they don't know how to code, and they put it out there. They just said it that, you know, I'm non-technical, so, you know, I use this and this software. I think it's a really odd rhetorical device to use, and I think that's what kind of sparked this idea for the article, is that it's okay to not know how to code, for example, but I would expect that somebody who's working in the digital industry at least have an ambition to learn how to code, or at least recognize the fact that if they did learn how to code, some of this stuff might be much easier for them. And I'm using coding just as a simple example. Obviously, technical as a word encompasses so many different things. But that was the kind of impetus for the article itself.
Yeah, and I'm wondering two things to put this into context. Are we basically referring to or talking about any digital marketer, whether they're in-house or a consultant or have an agency? And then number two, let's define a little bit more clearly what we mean by technical versus non-technical. Like, what tangibly are those skills that put you in one box or the other? Yeah.
Well, starting with the second one, I think that's one of the points I was making in the article, is that that's a false dichotomy. There is, if you start defining it like that, it gets very, very fuzzy, because when do you stop being non-technical and when do you start being technical? So I think like my argument in the article is that if you're working in digital, you are technical, like period, full stop. You are technical. But then the grade of technical expertise that you have in different things can vary a lot. So just by the virtue of working in digital and working with websites and mobile apps, you are already on a cline of various, you know, gradients of technical knowledge and know-how, regardless of if it's understanding how to code, or how web server works, or how 301 redirects work, or how Screaming Frog works, or how you use AdWords Bid Manager. They're all technical. They're all technical things. You have to understand, like, if you want to use them, you have to understand the underlying technical paradigm if you want to use them well. With server-side redirects, you have to know how a web server works. With, Screaming Frog, you have to understand what different HTTP status codes are. With AdWords Bid Manager, you have to know how a third-party cookie works and how these audiences are built, for example. So there's all these different paths going in all these different directions, and you're always technical. Like, that's my argument, and obviously it's a bad argument to make if there's nothing if that's the only thing that separates it from the non-technical versus technical, which is why I brought this idea of these learning paths. So you're always on a learning path, and the key thing is that you, instead of saying I don't know how to code, the way to fix it and the way to place you on a learning path is to say that I don't know how to code yet, and just kind of exhibit that ambition by saying that, you recognize that learning to code might be something that could be really useful for you in your career, and maybe at some point you will pick it up. But if you just say I don't know how to code and drop the mic, then it's I don't really understand where you're going with that kind of a rhetorical thing to say.
What do you think about somebody that is strictly a writer, like a copywriter? They're writing online, maybe on a blog, or they're writing for a news site, or somebody that might be doing something more like that looks like PR, like outreach, digital PR. How much would you say technical really matters for somebody like them that's really focused on writing, copywriting, connecting with people, maybe even people that do social media? How technical do they need to be? Or is it really just a matter of they should recognize, if they want to be better, that they should learn some technical skills?
Oh, I think that's a good point. Copywriting obviously is a bit between the worlds, and it kind of floats outside, if you're a marketing copywriter, it's quite easy to make the argument that it doesn't matter whether you're doing it for like print marketing or regular like physical marketing versus digital marketing. But I would still say that in doing copywriting for digital, for example, it's pretty significant to understand the capabilities of typography, of hyperlinking, all these different kind of things that you can use to enhance your copy. And then, of course, if you're doing copywriting for a specific digital product, for example, obviously the technical know-how of the product is important. But for the copywriter itself, that's actually a pretty good point. Obviously, like things that I mentioned, like typography and using dynamic HTML, for example, to enhance the copy would, for me, be again a question of a mission. Do I want to navigate toward that kind of copywriting, or am I satisfied with just writing, quote unquote? Might be different for other people. And then things like outreach, PR. I would be amazed if there's a PR channel these days that doesn't involve digital in some way. And then, of course, you would need to know the underlying technical limitations of a social media platform. For example, if you're doing outreach over that, like what can you do on Facebook? What are the limitations? All this kind of stuff. I think there are obviously, and I think it's a good thing that you raise these examples, because obviously there's going to be counterexamples to this, my very rigid approach to being technical. But at the same time, I think that almost any profession that is even remotely linked to the digital industry can also be linked to this technical know-how, and that way they can also enter these learning paths.
I don't know if you would call this technical, but one thing that I think everybody working online should know is advanced Google searches. Site search, in URL, in title, etc., negatives. I don't know if that's probably on the low end of the technical scale, but I think that's technical. And
obviously it is.
Yeah. And it's a skill, I believe, no matter if you're a copywriter, PR, social media, everybody can find value in that sort of skill. So I just wanted to point out one example that I think everyone can very easily and tangibly kind of jump into if you don't feel like you're technical and you want to know how to get started with that.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
I want to, when I was researching for this interview, I went to Google, speaking of which, and I searched I searched technical marketing. And I found a few interesting articles, one on Forbes, one on Moz, and I found some recent tweets from Ryan Hoover of Product Hunt and Patrick McKenzie. And so I want to start with those. I want to just kind of read a couple comments that they made about non-technical marketing and just see what you think about these, see
Sure.
how you would react to these. So the first one I noticed was a tweet by Ryan Hoover in which he is responding to, he was interviewed for a show. He was talking about he's not a coder, he's not technical. But then in his tweet, he says, I don't like the noun non-technical, which I believe, Ryan, is an adjective. That's okay. It values sales, marketing, design, and other roles that are needed to build a great company. So what do you think he's saying there? And is that a sentiment that you agree with?
Yes, I do agree with. I think the connotation of non-technical means that you're devoid of something that others have, and thus it makes you less something. So the approach that you're identifying yourself as a negative is the problem. I think the devaluation, especially in digital, the devaluation is real, because if you say you're non-technical, then a rigid interpretation, like my interpretation of being technical, means that you're in digital. Then if you say you're non-technical, if you follow my interpretation, that would mean that you're not actually in digital, or you're just faking it, or being an imposter. So I think the idea that we're categorizing people with this kind of a dichotomy that nobody can actually define rigidly is a problem, and it's used to falsely impose a hierarchy where none exists. Like there's technical and then there's non-technical somewhere below that, and in that way it's a bit divisive. So I think I do agree with Ryan. It's a good way to put it.
What you're kind of saying is the second you open up your laptop and you go online, you're doing something technical. You're on a computer. So we're all on this scale of digital, of technical.
Yeah.
Even if we're just opening up a text editor and writing copy, it's still technical. And it sounds like you sort of believe that everyone should at least have the awareness that they can advance themselves along that scale if they want to, and to recognize that that's something that would help them do better work.
Yeah, because
kind of get at the heart of what you're saying here.
Yes, I think that yes, it is. And the problem with non-technical is, let's say I'm speaking to someone and I ask them, could you do this server crawl, for example? Could you do a crawl for me? And they say, I'm sorry, I'm non-technical. I don't know. I can't do it. I'm non-technical. That doesn't answer my question. They didn't tell me what part of that process are they having trouble with. So non-technical is just used as this balloon term or blanket term. And it just seems to cover every single part of the. If it covers everything that's technical, what are you left with if you're working in digital? Right. Like what are you if you are non-technical and working in digital? What are your core skills? Whereas if you say, I can't do it because I don't know how to run the crawler. I can't do it because I don't understand how hyperlinks work or how the crawler follows them. I can't do it because I don't know if the crawler understands JavaScript. You're defining you're narrowing down which part of the technical paradigm you're having trouble with, which would then help you, give you some ideas for the learning path that you might want to take next.
I have just a fun tweet from Patrick McKenzie at Patio11. You can respond to this if you like, but I just want to read it to the listeners because he makes a very interesting point. He uses a word, I have no idea what it is, but he says, I'm going to substitute it. He says, it seems to be a very odd view of the world that some people who can write inner joins are non-technical and some who can't are technical. And then he says, many very talented folks I know who are in classically non-technical jobs do work which doesn't just look like programming, it literally is.
Yeah.
So it sounds like his point is like, there's people out there who are literally coding, but they're still claiming they're not technical.
I think the problem is that these people, by the way, this is something that we can blame software as well, because you have software and you have services that market themselves to the non-technical audience, but they do very technical things. So Google Tag Manager, for example, you hear a lot of people say I'm non-technical, so I use GTM because it lets me do this kind of stuff. Well, GTM is a full-blown, developer powerhouse. It injects code onto the website. Whether you know it or not, you're actually coding JavaScript. You're just using a user interface on top of it. So if you're saying you're non-technical and yet you're using GTM, you're a walking paradox, my friend. There's something wrong. There's something wrong with your approach. You have to understand that you're using a very, very technical tool. And now the question is that if you're using a very technical tool, does that by association also make you a technical person? Well, I think it does. It has to.
So I want to reference this article I saw in Forbes. Just by saying the name Forbes, I know I'm sort of like, we're bringing this out as like a target we can both fire at. Not, hopefully none of my audience out there is for some reason a fan of Forbes. I don't know why you would be now. Every time, literally, I've got to go to incognito just to open Forbes because it doesn't like my ad blocker. Yeah. But this guy who wrote an article about, the title of it, even just the title of it makes me laugh. He says the title is The New Mad Men, The Rise of the Technical Marketer. And this article is literally only from 2 years ago. It's not like the technical marketer was that new at that point in time. But one thing he says is that he claims the term growth hacker isn't used anymore. And that was even 2 years ago. And then he even calls the term growth hacker stupid. Do you agree with him on either of those sentiments?
Well, our company still has growth hackers. They don't. I think one of the problems with SEO is that things turn into a debate about terminology so fast and so easily. Like are we search engine optimization? Are we search experience optimizers? Things start and then SEO is dead and then it's back alive and so on. So I think if we're debating terminology, I think we're missing the point. I think we've lost the debate already. Whereas we should talk about the substance. I think his point, he's talking about growth hackers and marketing ninjas, and I think he has a good point that if we're just making up these terms to somehow conflate all these different technical abilities under a nomic, I think then we're failing. But at the same time, I have no problems with the term growth hacker if the person who uses it can explain what they actually do, because it's just a job title. Right. I have a hard time explaining what I do, and I consider myself a developer, and I have a hard time explaining that it doesn't always necessarily mean that I code day in, day out. I'm also a consultant. I also coach. I also do a lot of data mining. I also do analytics. So like titles and these kinds of things, are a diversion tactic for bloggers, because it's like as if they're running out of content to write about, they can always pick any job title and start debating if it's useful or not.
Yeah, diversion. I think that's podcasters too, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely.
They do make for fun discussions. Just trying to get those audience numbers up,
Exactly.
So I want to move to a Mars article now by Jamie. I'm going to get his last name wrong until I open this up here. Jamie Stephen. I actually knew Jamie from years ago at Moz.
Oh, right.
He wrote this article, December 12th, 2012, entitled "Every Marketer Should Be Technical," which is a little, I don't want to say ahead of its time, but like not as many people were talking about this at that time. So I found this article to be, quite refreshing when it first came out. But one thing he says, and I quote, "A great technical marketer can devise, develop, launch, and analyze their marketing campaigns with little or no assistance."
Yeah.
When I read that feels overwhelming. And I think to the credit of people that are afraid to get technical or to learn more along that path, it is overwhelming. I mean, it sounds like oh my goodness, we've got to do everything. So do you sort of subscribe to that definition? Is that even realistic for many people?
Well, I mean, this article, I didn't know this article existed, so it's great that you actually linked me to it before we talk, because this is an article I would have been, this is exactly what I think, like almost all of this article. The only place where I disagree with him is what you quoted. Because the moment we start defining, again, this is in my view, a technical person. It's a gradient. You can be very, very little technical, a lot technical. You're still technical. The moment we start defining that a technical marketer needs to be able to do this and this and this, you're alienating those people who might not have the capability of ever reaching that. So it's if you want to be able to devise, develop, launch, and analyze your marketing campaigns with little or no assistance, as he wrote, that actually requires quite a hefty investment in terms of what you have to learn. And once you have made that investment and you've learned to do this, you've been only focusing on one vertical, which is which is like marketing campaigns and launching those, and you've neglected all these other parts that might make you out even more hybrid as an employee or as a worker. So the problem is that we're in here. He's actually defining all these different qualities that a great technical marketer can have, and it's actually entirely possible a great technical marketer can have not one of these and still be a great technical marketer. They just have focused on something else, like operating campaigns on the technical level, like coding web services, coding apps that eventually turn into those marketing campaigns or are used to market, for example. So it's just. Defining things gets very, very difficult, and it's always easier to define what you are not rather than what you're supposed to be, which is why I took the easy way out with my article when I said, you're not non-technical, but I didn't tell what actually technical means,
right?
Because I knew that there is this problem of definitions always underlying everything.
Yeah, one sort of analogy that really comes to mind for me is with music. So I think you said you play ukulele on one of your bio. So I went to music school. My listeners know that. They don't need to hear me ramble on about that. But to me, if you sit down and you can play like a song, or you're beginning to learn music, you're still a musician. It's just you're not an avant-garde jazz musician that knows, like dominant seventh chord, like all these fancy chords and everything. But you're still a musician. You're still playing music. You're still in that world. You're in the game. And so I sort of see that as very similar. Like, even if you're playing a very simple, folk song or rock song, it's still technical because you're picking up an instrument and you're using it. So it's an analogy that comes to mind and it helps me kind of like make it a little more. One. Yeah. Make it a little more. It's a good one. Yeah. Thank you. So at the end, I'm going to tease the listeners here a little bit. At the end, I kind of want to close the loop and circle back to some things you would recommend people can do. Maybe like ways to be technical they hadn't thought of, paths they can be on to be technical. We're going to come back to that at the end, but what I want to do now is jump to talking a little bit about a talk that you gave. What was this? What was the talk titled? Understanding Definitions, I believe.
I think it was Meaningful Data.
Yeah, meaningful data. It was a talk that you gave, and at the beginning, you mentioned plug and play analytics, which is very funny because years ago I gave a presentation on how analytics and SEO can help one another. And the analogy I thought of, and maybe this is a little off, but I thought analytics, and I still think it's like IKEA furniture, meaning that when you buy IKEA furniture, it's just a pile of like wood and screws, and it's not really assembled to your specific needs. You have to put it together. And so, I don't know, tell me if you like that analogy or not, but I just think analytics is like that. Like to your point, if you just try to like install it, it's still not really assembled.
Yeah, that's a funny analogy, actually. It might be pretty apt. It just reminds me of this age-old debate between, agile and traditional waterfall-based marketing, where IKEA represents this, that you have to actually build it from start to finish until it works. So you have to put it together. You can't sit on it until all the screws are in place. Whereas agile, first you build a plank on 2 bricks that you can sit on. Then you turn that into a garden seat. Then you add cushions that turn it into a couch. And then you add a movie theater around it, turn it into a row of benches, for example. So the idea of prototype-based building, which is agile, versus this kind of end-to-end, full on. So that was the IKEA idea. And with analytics, it's actually a bit similar. So if you take the IKEA analogy, it's true that you absolutely do need to build it. You need to work on analytics for it to make sense. I mean, out of the box, it does give you data, but it's not that useful. It's not that meaningful because the data is normalized. It has to, for Google Analytics to be a good tool, it has to be usable by every single industry in the world. So by the default configuration is always really normalized and kind of very bland, and you have to work on it. But where I would not mainly take the IKEA way would be then to really put a lot of effort into it and add all these different data collection points and customize it really complex ways until it starts giving you good data. Whereas I think the more important thing is that you just need to constantly work on it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter like. Yeah, exactly. It's a process. It's a process of auditing and reevaluation. Just like SEO, you can't just do something and then deliver it. You have to actually work on it all the time. It's not like obviously there are projects that you only do for a couple of months and then it's over. But I think that most people in SEO would agree that the biggest gains happen when you're doing the actual constant optimization and not just the initial technical audit and the fixing of things, but once you start really working on content marketing and link building and stuff like this.
In this talk, you talk about the importance of understanding definitions. I see this problem all the time in SEO. Like, for example, people in Search Console that still think average position is the same thing as rankings, or they still think domain authority, which is Moz's metric, is somehow tied to Google, and it's not. So why is it important to understand the meaning behind the definitions of these metrics?
Well, I think in the presentation I use sessions as an example. Sessions is kind of the key piece of information in Google Analytics. Almost all the meaningful metrics revolve around a session. Conversion rates, bounce rates, just time per session, pages per session. They're all revolving around this concept of a session. And I'm not sure that so many people actually know what a session is. They know vaguely that it has to do with timing out. When you spend 30 minutes idling on the website, your session should basically time out.
I don't even know if a lot of people know that. I knew it from reading Avanash's book. What is it? Analytics or something? I forget the title of his book. But break that down. Like, take a minute and define what a session actually is. And I know you do this in the presentation. So this is really one of the meat of things I wanted to get to here.
Well, I can tell part of it. Obviously, some of it is obfuscated by Google's algorithms, and we don't know necessarily the full picture. But the key things are, in a default configuration, a session expires after 30 minutes of inactivity. So if in 30 minutes no hits are sent to Google Analytics, then your session ends. And the next time a hit is sent, a new session starts. And that's that's called a session timeout. And you can actually change this in your property settings. So if you want to increase or decrease this timeout, you can do it. The second part, which many people, or not many, but some people know, is that at midnight of the time zone in the Google Analytics profile, at midnight the session ends. So if you're browsing the site at 11:59 p.m., then in 1 minute your session will end, even if you're just constantly sending hits to Google Analytics, and then a new session starts at the first possible moment after midnight.
And is midnight based upon what time zone?
It's a time zone you've configured in your Google Analytics view. So if you have a single property with let's say 10 different views, each with their own time zone, then the same set of data can actually be reported in different ways in each, because each one has a different concept of a session. So it's very gets very complicated very quick. And the other key thing about session expiration is if you enter the site through some campaign, let's say an organic search, for example. So you search for Google Tag Manager and you found my blog and you clicked the link and you landed on my site. Well, now you have a new session that has Google Organic as its source of medium. Now, if you leave the site and immediately come back via a Google ad, for example, a search ad, a new session starts because your campaign actually changed. You're no longer an organic Google visit, you're a Google CPC visit. So a new session starts with this new attribution. Now, if you leave again and immediately enter via a tagged newsletter link, again, a new session starts placing you as a newsletter visitor. So if GA starts a new session every time your source medium changes, which might trip some people up and might make them wonder, like, how do I have so many sessions? Well, it might be because you have a very active campaign going on and people can enter your site in many different ways, and they do it as well.
Now that myself and the listeners have this maybe new awareness of sessions, maybe not for some people, what can we do about this? Like, because for a lot of people, they do just install analytics and they get their session data. Is there something we can do to better make sense of this? And let's start with that question. What can we do to fix this?
It's not necessarily something you have to fix. I think the important part here is to understand that there is this underlying complexity. And the reason why sometimes things can look a little awkward in GA is because of this complexity. And then get enough understanding of this algorithm to know where to debug if things go wrong. Like, do you have, for example, a classic example is if you're adding these UTM parameters, which you use to tag links for Google Analytics, if you add them to internal links on the site. So let's say you have a link to your product pages, and for some reason you've added UTM parameters to that, it was an internal link click. Then every single time somebody clicks that link, a new session will start. And you'll know this from your GA data that you have an oddly inflated session count, and you have lots of entrances from this internal link, and then you'll know, okay, you might want to fix that. Another prime example, which I think everybody should immediately stop listening and go and check if this is the case, and then come back and listen, is if you're using payment portals. So if you're using like PayPal or I don't know what's in the States, but in Finland, for example, we have all these different bank portals where you can go and pay your transaction, and then it takes you back to the site. In most of these cases, when you're returned back to the site, you're actually returned as a referral traffic. So you're returning as paypal.com/referral.
And this is why a lot of people, sorry to interrupt, but for some listeners, it's why you might see your checkout page as a landing page as the first page of the session. Yeah.
And you'll see that session attributed to PayPal when instead you want it to be attributed to the original campaign that brought them to the site. Right. So in that case, that's a data integrity problem. And the way to fix that is to go to your referral exclusion list, which you'll find in your property settings, and just start adding these payment domains, payment portals, add their domain names to that list. And when you add, for example, paypal.com to the referral exclusion list, what happens is that GA ignores the referral. It basically treats it as direct traffic, which in turn is then attributed to the last existing campaign, which would be the one that brought you to the site.
A lot of the context of your talk is in measuring content with analytics. Yeah. And you talk about measuring content like it's a product. And I really like that. Can you break down what you mean by that and how listeners can do that?
Yeah, so GA has this really wonderful set of reports called Enhanced E-commerce, which lets you basically follow the lifetime of a product in a single session, from being viewed by the user to being clicked for more details, to being added to the cart, to being checked out, and finally to be purchased. So you can view the entire funnel for these products using GA. And well, at some point I just had this, I had this epiphany that it really makes, when you have a blog, for example, it's very similar to an e-commerce funnel. You're pushing out articles. You have all these recommended articles, and you have a main page with a stream of articles. And then people click those articles open so that they can view more details about the content. They start scrolling down those articles as in they're figuring out, is this a good article? And they read it. Then they reach the end, which I interpret as a purchase. So the way I did it is that when you open an article, it's a product detail view. You're inspecting the details of the product, which happens to be an article. When you start scrolling, the minute you start scrolling, it's a product add to cart. So you're interested in the product and you add it to the cart with the intent that you might actually buy what I'm writing in a way. Mm-hmm. And then when you scroll down, when you reach 1/3 of the article, that would be the first checkout step. Like let's say it's your shipping address. When you reach 2/3 of the article is the second checkout step. Let's say it's the payment method. And then when you reach the end, you've spent a minute on the site. I just use a minute arbitrarily. It's a purchase. So you've bought the product. And what this gives me is it gives me a beautiful funnel of how many times a specific article was opened, how many times it was added to cart or scrolled, how many times it was scrolled more than a halfway mark, which is the checkout funnel, and finally how many times it was actually read or quote unquote read, which is the purchase part.
And here's why SEO should love this report is because we're all talking about user metrics now. Hey everyone, Dan here. Just want to take a break real quick to tell you about one of my favorite tools, BuzzSumo. Just the other day, I was doing some research for a client. I wanted to try to find sites that were authoritative around green tea that they could either get content ideas from, look at as content competitors, or possibly guest publish on. So I went to Google, and in fact, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to google.com. I'm going to search for green tea blog. Let's try that. Okay, I'm getting some weird green-tea-guide website. The art of Japanese green tea, that's okay. But I'm not really finding sites that aren't specific to green tea. So like, how do I find these? Do I just search like health drink websites? It's really difficult, weirdly, to find these types of things this quickly and easily in Google. But that's where BuzzSumo comes in. So if I go to BuzzSumo and I just search green tea right off the bat, no filters, nothing, I get sites like Freebie Mom, who wrote about green tea, The Harvest Kitchen, who wrote about green tea, OnlyMyHealth.com. So I'm instantly finding sites that publish content related to green tea, but aren't specifically all about green tea. And that's exactly what I wanted to find. Of course, in BuzzSumo, I could filter this by content from the last year, from the last 6 months, or even back to the last 5 years. And I could filter even further by infographics, guest posts, articles, by country, by language. It's an incredibly fast and powerful way to find sites for my clients. So if you go to buzzsumo.com, use the discount code DANSHURE, DANSHURE, for 30% off 3 months. That's $75 of savings off of BuzzSumo. Okay, let's get back into today's show. SEO should love this report is because we're all talking about user metrics now. People searching, clicking on your site, going to your content. How well do they engage with, consume that content versus the competitors that are on that same result page? Is there a resource out there for how somebody can actually create this report or somewhere they can go to figure this out?
Well, I have an article about this, which you can add to the show notes. So there's an article about this. The problem is I don't have a generic guide for how to do it. I only tell you like what you need to take into account, because it doesn't really differ at all from basic enhanced e-commerce measurement. But I can't give a generic guide because every single blog is different enough to make it very difficult to write something very generic. But it has some nice features. For example, one thing I want to point out is that because in e-commerce, one of the most key metrics is revenue. So you have to know how many euros or dollars your website generated. Well, obviously, reading a blog post doesn't generate any revenue. So I use a proxy. I use the number of words in the article is the amount of revenue it produced if a person read it. So I have a beautiful vanity metric right now, and we're looking at my dashboard, and I can see that last month 15 million words were read on my blog, and I think that's such a vanity metric if there ever was one for a content publisher.
I wish we all made money that way. Believe me.
Exactly. I look at the number and I think about, oh man, if that was my bank account and balance, I would be in a different place right now.
So let's chat about bounce rate for a moment. This is something, and back to your point earlier about how there's unfortunately, in the world of SEO, there are so many people throwing around rhetoric that they heard somewhere or it sounds cool. And the thing that you hear a lot is like, oh, you got to improve your bounce rate. It's going to hurt your SEO and your user metrics. So this sort of aligns with that point you made earlier about how there's just a lot of nonsense out there in the world of SEO. But talk to us about bounce rate. Why is it a terrible metric? Like, what are the problems with bounce rate? How do people misunderstand it?
Let's start with the fact that it's a terrible metric out of the box. So if with plug and play analytics, the only thing the bounce rate measures is the number of single page view sessions, like out of the box, no event tracking, only single page view sessions. Obviously, that tells you absolutely nothing. So let's say I visit your site, I visit your store, and I buy $15 million worth of stuff, but I only send one page view. Well, the Google Analytics will claim that it's a bounce, but I actually generate a whole lot of revenue for you. So with plugin, the more uncustomized your setup is, the more broken bounce rate will be. So what you can do next is to start improving bounce rate, start measuring, as a metric, start measuring all these key interactions that take place on the site that can break a bounce. For example, all your calls to action need to be measured, newsletter signups need to be measured, e-commerce transactions need to be measured, so that bounce can actually tell you when a session was a bad quality session for you. When none of these key call to action things happened, then you can consider bounce a good metric. And then even then, like let's say you have a really well configured website, the problem with bounce rate is that it conflates a million different reasons why the session was a bad session, so to speak. It's such an aggregate metric. It's such a combined horrible, it goes against everything we do as analysts, which is segment and drill down, and it puts it all behind a bounce rate metric. It's just like using a quality index, for example. Whenever you have a single metric that conflates a whole lot of complexity, you're doing it wrong. So I've always used the example that, for example, if there's a high bounce rate on the Contact Us page, I wouldn't be worried about that. The user found what they were looking for. They called you on their phone, which you can't obviously track. So if there's a high bounce rate on your Google Maps page, I wouldn't worry about that. I'm driving the car, I'm looking for the address. I don't want to be engaged with the content. I just want the damn address. So there's lots of reasons for a session to be a single bounce. And if you really want to know if a bounce was good or bad, you always have to look beyond the single session. What happened in the next session the user visited? And what did the user do cross-session? Like a bounce only tells you the story of a single session. It doesn't tell you anything about if the user was actually happy or disappointed with your services. So bounce rate is just a poster boy for this kind of plug and play analytics, because it just conflates everything that's wrong with using aggregate data for analytics.
And I imagine you have some resources on how people can maybe do adjusted bounce rate or track scrolling, etc. And if so, I'll link to those in the show notes as well. One thing I've always been curious, I always look at the conversion metric of blogging is somebody leaving a comment. That's just me. That's my personal measure of success. If somebody has been compelled enough to react and take their time, even on their mobile device where it's a real pain, to leave a comment, to want to engage, to me, that's a success metric. Is there a way to measure that as a goal?
Yep, absolutely. It's just simply depending on what commenting software you use. For example, with third-party software like or services like Disqus, it might be a bit more difficult. But also, all you basically need is to tap into the comment section or the comment plugin and have it send an event to GA when a comment is submitted, and then you turn that event into a goal. That's completely doable. I think the key part of this is that, so let's say the commenting is an important metric for you. I would say that any blog has, a handful of very important conversion metrics. Some of them of which are obvious, like commenting. Maybe social shares are another thing. Scrolling can be very obvious as well, like we want people to scroll. But then there are the more surreptitious ones, like subscribing to a newsletter, visiting the site more than once, like being a return visitor. That might be a very good conversion metric for me.
Or just checking out your social media profile and following.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So there's all these conversions themselves. There's no binary like good and bad conversion. There's just conversions, and they might have different weights. With e-commerce, it's always easy because weight is always measured in money.
Revenue.
But with something like a blog, then you obviously you need to create the hierarchy yourself. And you might, for example, and this is why analytics is so fun. You might now say that, for example, in your blog, leaving a comment is your most important conversion. But let's say you now added a social share as a conversion goal as well. And then in 2 months' time, you take a look at your analytics data and compare the users who shared versus the users who commented, and see which one of these is actually a better user for you, which one frequents your site more, which one scrolls more. And you might actually find that all along the social share metric has been an even better conversion metric in telling you what a good user is. So analytics, the beauty of analytics is that it can be very brutal, and it can destroy all our misconceptions, but it's so important that it does so, because otherwise we'll only be guessing and kind of guessing our way through life. And even though it's good to have a lot of unknown unknowns in life as well, I think if we have data at our fingertips, it would be kind of a shame not to use it to our best ability, which is why I think like customizing an analytics setup for content publishers especially is so incredibly important.
One challenge I am struggling with right now, and I'm actually writing an article about this, is how to measure. So let me step back. One contention I always get from clients is that, well, great, we do content marketing, it drives traffic, we get search traffic to our articles, but they're top of funnel and they don't convert. They don't drive revenue. And one thing I'm trying to do a lot better job of is showing how content and content marketing actually does lead to business goals. And of course, one thing I try to encourage and teach all clients to do is use assisted conversions, especially first click in analytics. Yeah. In this article, I'm actually showing how I know that one blog post I did generated a really good amount of revenue from 2 clients because they emailed and told me. But there's no analytics for that. So does anything come to mind for ways that we can help show the value of content as it relates to business goals?
Well, GA, for example, does have a lot of tools for analyzing the full customer journey. So as it happens on your website, I mean. So it's pretty easy to create segments, create segments where you look at, show me what users who have visited more than one blog post have been doing, and see if they're converting, if they're buying. And then you can start running things like A/B tests, adding relevant product placement to your blog posts where it makes sense, adding view the one-click product view links in the middle of the blog post, for example. Try and figure out different ways how to connect your content with your e-commerce work, for example. Add sales generation lead phone numbers in relevant places in the blog post. So you can start testing all this stuff, but it doesn't make sense to test anything until you're collecting the data. So segments is a very useful way. It can be very good for creating hypotheses. So basically you can create segments in GA where you ask, for example, show me conversion metrics for users who have visited at least 3 articles in the last month. You can do that in GA with a little customization.
One issue I think I've seen with segments, maybe this is a myth in my own head, does it mess with the sample data? So in other words, are you seeing percentages of the data, especially for sites that have lots of traffic, or am I making that up in my head?
No, segments, sampling does become a problem with segments because GA samples all reports that are ad hoc. So anything that way you combine a set of dimensions and metrics that are not kind of standard. And a segment is almost always this. So if you have a date range in your analytics, if you're observing data in a date range which exceeds 500,000 sessions, if you're using the free Google Analytics, then any ad hoc reports will be sampled. So if you create a segment when you have over 500,000 visits in that time, you will be looking at a sample subset of your data. And depending on how much data you have, it might be a problem or it might not. So sometimes the sampling is actually really well done, and it mirrors the reality fairly well if you don't look at like absolute numbers, but you look at trends. Whereas in other times, if you have a very low frequency data point, for example, product return in a website with a low return rate, then you might see some really odd numbers because the sampling starts just tableauing that stuff to crazy numbers. So, or plateauing, sorry, not tableauing, plateauing those numbers. So you'll know your report is sampled if in Google Analytics interface, you'll see a yellow shield next to the report name in the top of the screen. If the shield is green, then there's no sampling. If it's yellow, there might be sampling. And you'll just have to know at that point that the data you're working with is actually just a subset of the real data, and it's been extrapolated from the subset. And if you want to get rid of sampling, you only have like basically one option, which is to reduce the time range until you have a time range which has less than 500,000 sessions in it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That was the exact limit, 500 sessions. That's good to know. So I want to slowly start circling back towards what people can be doing to become so-called more technical. I know it's a gradient is what the context we're talking about. So just real quick, Google Tag Manager is something that you're very passionate about. You talk a lot about it. You blog a lot about it. But for myself and some of the listeners, perhaps, I'm sort of like, my first question is, what is Google Tag Manager? I sort of know, but let's start there. Like, what is Google Tag Manager? And then maybe like real quick, how can somebody start to get their feet wet with that?
Right. So it's a tool that basically gives you a user interface through which you can deploy marketing, analytics, advertising pixels on the website and basically collection libraries. And what this means is that, let's say in the world before Google Tag Manager, if you wanted to measure things with Google Analytics, you actually had to add these little lines of code everywhere where you wanted to measure interaction. You actually had to write the JavaScript yourself. Or if you wanted to add an AdWords conversion pixel, you actually had to copy paste that pixel into the page template. And with Google Tag Manager, the way it works is that you actually just add one single block of code, which is called the container. And then everything else happens through this user interface so you can actually, if you want to measure a new Google Analytics event, all you have to do is use this user interface to create a tag, which is what these events are called. And you create the tag and then you add a trigger to it. For example, you can set the trigger to be whenever somebody clicks the blog comment button. And then the event is sent to Google Analytics. And you can do this entirely without writing a single line of JavaScript. So that's the appeal of Google Tag Manager, is that it gives you a very technical interface, and it does these very technical things, but you don't actually have to write a single line of code. And that's the marketing pitch of GTM. Now, I completely disagree that it's a good pitch, but it does get new users, and it gets a lot of users that way.
So other than your site, which I'm going to link to very generously in the show notes, is going to just Google Tag Manager's own resources? Are those two good places to begin if people want to start learning that?
Well, my site might not be the best place to go if you want to start learning GTM. I've kind of, over the years, just kind of started going towards the more advanced use cases and let others write the beginner guides in a way. I do have some basic guides for variables and triggers. And whenever a new feature is released, I do write a guide about it, which I hope is easy enough to understand. But there are some great resources out there. So Google itself has a good, in the Analytics Academy, which is like a video learning series, they have a own section for Google Tag Manager, and the fundamentals course is really good if you want to get your feet wet. Then there are companies like lunametrics.com. They have one of my favorite analytics blogs out there. They have a lot of great stuff for GTM as well. They've also published a book for Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager work. enor.com, another good place, and they've always also published an excellent book for learning GA and GTM. So there are lots of great resources. Our good friend Michael King from iPullRank also has a Google Tag Manager guide, which is actually a really great one. So you'll find that on the iPullRank.com site as well. So there are lots of great resources, many beginner guides as well. The thing about GTM is that it actually doesn't necessarily even need a beginner guide. It's very intuitive to use as long as you just watch one video somewhere. Oh, there's also something called Measure School, which is a video learning resource as well, run by Julian Juneman, and you'll find that online as well. A great resource for learning about GTM.
Two things that I saw on your site that seem really interesting you can do, just to say some quick examples. It looks like you can track YouTube videos and SoundCloud, which is really cool to me because I love video and I love audio content. So it's just two examples of things. Next, you've got some Google Analytics add-ons for Google Docs. I'll link to those in the show notes. But I sort of feel like this is a great user-friendly way to get a little more technical with Google Analytics, using the APIs, bringing that into Google Sheets. What is this exactly, and how can we use that?
All right. So I wrote those I actually wrote them for a client because we wanted to automate some of the trivial stuff. And then I thought, this might be useful for others as well. So I published them in the Chrome Web Store. So the add-ons are Google Sheets add-ons. And the first one basically just pulls all the Google Analytics accounts, properties, and profiles that you have access to with your user, and it turns them into a Google Sheet. It's just for an inventory kind of thing. And then it lets you select some of these profiles, and then it creates a new sheet that has all the custom dimensions that you've configured for these profiles. And custom dimensions are these kind of customizable measurement dimensions that you can add to Google Analytics. They're not, I wouldn't say they're beginner level. They need a little bit of customization in GA, but for managing those, then the Sheets is actually a very useful tool. And the second add-on has to do with custom dimensions. Again, it basically lets you mass update all the custom dimensions of a single property. It's useful because sometimes we have all these 50 different custom dimensions with all these different configurations, and then we want to create a new Google Analytics property, and we want to copy all those custom dimensions there. And then we don't want to do the manual work because it takes hours and hours to add all those in. So it's just an automation tool. One thing I just want to pitch quickly, that if you use Google Sheets and you're interested in Google Analytics, then GA has a free Google Analytics add-on for Google Sheets that's absolutely wonderful. And it I'd say that 75% of my time with GA happens outside the Google Analytics user interface. I use these Sheets add-ons. I use the API queries. The user interface is kind of getting slower and slower every day, and it's kind of outdated in many ways. It's still really good, but I love the freedom that these query tools give me. I can compile exactly the kind of queries I want. I can save them in a Google Sheet and have them run themselves automatically every night at 3 a.m., for example.
Very cool. So we talked about some ways people can become more technical, coding, using GTM, analytics, etc. Are there a few other quick examples of ways that if people are out there listening, especially in the SEO space, that they can advance their journey on the technical path?
Well, I think the learning paths are so individual that it's, again, quite difficult to give a generic answer. But one thing I think that everybody working in at least working with websites will benefit from is to go to codecademy.com and take the HTML and CSS track they have. You'll learn the basic HTML markup stuff, which I think anybody working in technical SEO or even any kind of SEO will benefit from, because you have to know what an HTML template is, what HTML tags are, what meta tags are, how you manipulate that stuff. At one point, when I was doing a lot of job interviews, I always had this one question that I asked from candidates, and it was always to explain to me what happens when you type a URL into the browser and press enter. What follows? What is the request? What happens when the request is made to the web server? How is the return? What happens when the request is returned? How does the web page render the HTML? So codecademy.com has a lot of resources for enhancing your skills with coding and markup, and it's free. It has a pro version as well, but it's free. You can get a lot of information. And once you've done with HTML and CSS, I really recommend taking the JavaScript tracks as well, because if I had to select one skill for the desert island scenario, for anyone working digital, it's JavaScript. The whole web is JavaScript. It's the most popular programming language in the world. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So it would definitely be something for anyone to pick up.
I love those tips. One other quick thing, if people want to get really hands-on, just install the web developer plugin in Chrome or Firefox and play around with it, like turn CSS on and off, turn JavaScript on and off, see what happens, see how websites load without these certain components. I love doing that. It's even just fun. So this has been tons of fun chatting. I want to just kind of close out with a few fun questions about yourself. I hesitate to use the word personal brand because, it's I don't like the term myself, but we all know what I mean when I say that. One thing I noticed is that you have 1,000 monthly searches in Google for your name. Did you know that?
Wow. Yeah. No, I did not. That's very unnerving.
Yeah, that's global. So, it's across everywhere. What do you think causes that? Is it your speaking? Is it your blogging? And I think in more general terms for everybody out there, what helps you or anybody stand out and cause people to want to search their name in Google?
So, well, 900 of those searches are from myself, of course, and maybe my mom. So I might have a different approach to this whole personal branding thing than others do, because I don't have this is like 100%, my blog is 100% a hobby. I don't have a mailing list. I don't have a donate button. I pay the hosting fees out of my own back. I'm happy with that. I want to keep it independent from any revenue streams, because at the moment I start asking for money or suggesting I might want money, that's the moment it becomes a chore. So I think, and now I'm just guessing, and I'm actually very uncomfortable about speaking of myself in this way, but I'm just guessing here that one of the reasons why it's been so successful is, first of all, it's a niche. And I started very early on. There was very few others who were focusing entirely on like web analytics customization when I started blogging. And this was only, 4 years ago, but still, not that many were doing it. Like there were people like Avinash who are doing the analytics side of things, like how to measure stuff, how to build a business around data. But people who would be writing about like JavaScript tips for analytics, I don't think those were very common. So one of the things was finding a niche and the other thing, my SEO strategy is to just put content out there, like a lot of it, and quantity over quality almost always.
Yeah.
Like I think it's just, I have a very stream of conscious type of writing. I start writing. I usually write an article. I very rarely take more than 1 hour to write anything, even if it's like 5,000 words. And I put it out there, and then I do some editing later on. So just put content out there, and then one of the things that I've been doing is I'm really, really active in support forums and in the product forums. So when I write about Google Analytics or Google Tag Manager, I actually follow up these things in the product forums. When people have problems, I tell them that, I have a solution behind this link, take a look. Or is it okay if I take your question and turn it into a blog post? So that's an easy way to generate content as well. And then the one more thing is that I'm so incredibly grateful for the comment section of my blog. Like I get dozens and dozens of people asking and commenting and sharing their own tips. Like it's living a life of its own, and I think it's a very encouraging environment for people to share their solutions, because it is a technical blog. So obviously people have different ways of implementing these things, so they want to share those. And I'm so incredibly happy that people have been so excited about that. And I think the thing that ties this all together is the fact that and now this is going to sound ironic, but I really, really, and hypercritical, but I really try to avoid blatant self-promotion. So I want to let my content speak for itself. I only tweet my content out once. I don't do those in case you missed this stuff or stuff like that. I let others do the retweeting for me, and I will always participate in any discussion people have. I will be happy to participate them and that way kind of promote the content. But I try to avoid the kind of me marketing. I just write content, and I hope that it's. And maybe this has been the reason why it's been so successful, that people can come to my blog without having to be bombarded by branding or by requests to join a mailing list or by exit intent pop-ups or retargeting or anything like that. It's a hobby blog with technical content that hopefully is useful for others. And I think that's why it survived so well for so long.
I love that. The last thing I'm curious about, because you seem like somebody that's sort of in motion, right? You did SEO and then you're out of SEO,
yeah.
You're in GTM. You seem like you're sort of always, to use a word I really love, evolving.
Yeah.
What is there anything next for you? Like, are you going to do this for a while? Do you see something in the vision for 5 years, 10 years from now? Anything at all that comes to mind for you there?
Well, that's a perfect time to ask the question, because so my wife and I just had our first baby 4 months ago. Thanks. So he's a 4-month-old kid now, and he's completely, robbed me of all motivation for anything else except playing with him. So I'm kind of in a slump right now. I'm still like enjoying work and enjoying blogging, but I'm feeling like my priorities are shifting so momentously that I have no idea what's going to happen in a year or so. Professionally, what I'm looking for is at some point, I think I want to exit the consultant space. Maybe find a good in-house place to work on development and analytics. Maybe go out alone, do some freelance work and have more time with the family. one thing that I've always wanted to do is kind of invent and build. So I really hope that at some point I'll find an interesting app or an interesting service or interesting software where I could be of use in helping building that, and maybe work with that for a while. But all my options are open right now. I'm really happy at Reaktor. I'm learning new skills every day. I'm working on stuff that I didn't dream of being able to work a year ago. I'm happy with my blog. I'm happy that Google appreciates what I do. So we'll see. I'm all my options are open. I'm still, I'm only 33, so I have a whole lot of growing up still to do before I feel like I finally found my roots in some place.
That's great, and congratulations again on the
Thanks
child.
so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, Simo, it's been great chatting with you. I love this episode already. I haven't even listened back to it
Thanks, Dan.
yet. So just close out and tell people where they can find you online, your website, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc.
Right, so should be easy enough. It's simoahava.com. I have my Twitter handle is Simo Ahava as well. You'll find me on Google Plus as well if you still use that. There's a very active Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager community. You'll find me on the product forums for Google Tag Manager, the official Google product forums. You'll find me on LinkedIn as well with Simo Ahava, though I very rarely use that platform anymore. But those are the best ways. My website has my email address if you want to contact me, but don't expect a fast response. I get quite a bit of email every day, and I try to do my best, but obviously I have to be a bit brutal in how I use my free time. And those are the best ways.
You're out there speaking a lot. Are you going to be in the States even, or anywhere people can see you in person?
Yes. So I've cut down actually a lot. A couple of years ago, I was still doing like 30 or 40 presentations a year in different conferences. Last year I dropped them down to 10. This year I'm trying to drop it down to 5. Just a handful of. I've been refusing so many kind invitations that I feel really bad about it. But I'm trying to avoid too much travel at the moment. I want to spend time with the family. Mm-hmm. In the States, it's possible something's going to come up later in 2018. I try to visit the Google Analytics Summit, which is typically in the fall in San Francisco. And then maybe in 2019, when the boy is a bit grown up, we can start traveling as a family. And then, of course, I can do a lot more. But at the moment, my travel is pretty much restricted to Europe and European conferences. So if you're out there, I always have an updated list of my upcoming talks in my website.
Excellent. So definitely go check that out. Simo, again, it's been great chatting with you today. And
you too, Dan.
Yep. We'll see everyone next time on Experts on the Wire.